I want to introduce the topic of tonight by telling you a story about the man who went to Home Depot. There was a man who went to Home Depot, and he took one of those big carts, and as he walked down the trail of the various aisles, he saw things and he began pulling them onto his cart. Toilet seats, nails, hammers, pneumatic guns, drill bits, boards, plywood, sink faucets, dry salt, paint. And someone finally, in that friendly orange apron, asked him, "What is it that you are doing?" He says, "Well, I'm building a house." "Really? Well, what do you have here?" "Well, houses have toilet seats and faucets and boards and lots of paint and that sort of thing. And so my house has to have these things because that's what houses have." He says, "Well, what do the blueprints require for your house?" The man said, "Blueprints?" See, unless we know where we are going, it influences how we do what we do. And the when question we must ask with respect to how we live in history determines, in fact, how we live in history. Unless we have an understanding of the end, we won't understand how to live toward that end. Eschatology matters. As I tried to show you this afternoon with respect to translitigation, the enemies of the cross have an eschatology. We ought to have an eschatology as well. We ought to have it informed biblically apart from our own conceptions and so forth. And so what I'd like to suggest tonight is that we are going to do an exploration of eschatology. Now this is an intra-family debate, an intramural issue. We're not dealing with the great antithesis as we saw between separation of church and state. We're not dealing with creation versus evolution. We're dealing with an intramural matter. The trouble is, with many intramural matters, we think of them like family matters. It doesn't matter if Bobby has chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream. It's all just fine and happy. No, this is a debate that does matter, even though it is an intramural debate. And so I want you to have those kinds of ears to listen and eyes to see as we go through these issues, because it's important to know the when so that we can understand the how. And we're going to talk about the Great Tribulation, past, Gary Demar, or future, Thomas Ice. The scripture contains a number of references to tribulation. Matthew 24, "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken." Tribulation is used many, many ways. I think the participants tonight will be focusing on Matthew 24, but not exclusively. And so what we're going to do then is move to this debate. And let me introduce the participants. First of all, Dr. Tommy Ice. Dr. Ice is the executive director for the Pre-Trib Research Center and serves the faculty of Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. He founded the center in 1994 with Dr. Tim LaHaye to research, teach, and defend the pre-tribulation rapture and related Bible prophecy doctrines. Dr. Ice has co-authored about 30 books, written hundreds of articles, and is a frequent conference speaker. He has served as a pastor for 15 years. Dr. Ice has a BA from Howard Payne University, a THM from Dallas Theological Seminary, a PhD from Tyndale Theological Seminary, and is a doctoral candidate at the University of Wales in church history. Parenthetically, his student loans are bigger than mine. Gary Demar. Gary Demar is the president of American Vision. He earned the MDiv degree from Reformed Theological Seminary, and his undergraduate degree is from Western Michigan University. He is the author of more than 20 books covering a full range of topics and serves as editor-in-chief of Biblical Worldview magazine. Gary has been interviewed by Time magazine, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, the BBC, and Sean Hannity. Gary's radio show, known as History Unwrapped, is heard on 250 nations nationwide. Parenthetical, Gary is Italian. That's a good thing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, the format's a bit different from last time. Mr. Demar will be beginning with an opening statement. He will have 15 minutes to make that opening statement. Mr. Demar.
I will argue that the Olivet Discourse found in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21 was fulfilled in the events leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. The Great Tribulation is a past event. Thomas Ice has argued that the Olivet Discourse refers to a future Great Tribulation that takes place after a pre-tribulational rapture of the church. Why the emphasis on the Olivet Discourse? The first use of the phrases Great Tribulation and Great Distress found in Luke's version of the Olivet Discourse appear in the Olivet Discourse. The Olivet Discourse is found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, giving us parallel accounts of the same events, so we can make some comparisons. Specific questions are asked by the disciples and answered by Jesus. We know the subjects involved. A definite time parameter is stated. This generation will not pass away. A particular audience is identified that will see all these things. There is no debate about when the Gospels were written prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 that Tommy and I would agree with. While there is a great debate about the dating of the book of Revelation, there is no debate about when Matthew was written. And according to Tommy, the Olivet Discourse is the key to eschatology. The starting point. After learning from Jesus that the temple will be left desolate within a generation in Matthew chapter 23, verse 36, the disciples ask him a series of questions. He says, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? The disciples link the desolation of the temple, the sign of his coming, and the end of the age as a single event. In fact, Tommy agrees. The disciples apparently thought, he writes, that all three elements, the destruction of the temple, the sign of Christ's coming, and the end of the age would occur at the same time. But Tommy argues that the disciples were wrong to relate the impending judgment upon Jerusalem and the temple with the return of Messiah. He says that it was common for Jesus to correct the disciples. If Jesus set out to correct the disciples, he did not do a very good job. First, why didn't Jesus say, you're mistaken about these things, or simply, you are mistaken? If in fact Jesus has corrected the disciples in the past, and we know where he has corrected them because he states that he has corrected them, there's no place in Matthew 24 where we are told that Jesus is correcting them. And even if there is a place where you could find that he is correcting them, it doesn't state what he is correcting them about. Second, why did Jesus use language that clearly indicates a first century fulfillment? Each time the disciples heard Jesus use the phrase, this generation, they knew that Jesus always referred to their generation, never a future generation. He told them, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. And here I have two slides that you will see with the way this generation, I'm going back and forth now, is used throughout the gospel account, except for Matthew chapter 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. In each of these cases, this generation refers to the generation to whom Jesus is speaking. There is, as far as I know, nobody who claims that these references to this generation refer to anything other than the generation to whom Jesus is speaking. In fact, Tommy agrees that this generation always means the generation to whom Jesus was speaking. But he offers this qualification. He says, it is true that every other use of this generation in Matthew refers to Christ's contemporaries. But that is determined by observation from each of their contexts, not from the phrase itself. Most commentators disagree.